It was a bright and quiet afternoon at Riverside Park. The sun was shining through the tall trees, casting soft shadows on the walking paths. Birds chirped in the distance, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. The park was filled with life. Children laughing, dogs barking playfully, and neighbors chatting on benches. At the edge of a small pond, near a wooden bench beneath a large oak tree, sat an elderly black man named Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry came to this park almost every day. He wore a tan cardigan over a plain white shirt, with brown pants and well-worn shoes. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his warm eyes scanned the park gently as he leaned slightly on his wooden cane. Sitting on the bench, he pulled a small paper bag from his pocket and tossed a few breadcrumbs onto the grass. Nearby ducks waddled closer, eager for a snack. He smiled quietly, enjoying the peaceful moment. As he focused on the ducks, a man approached from across the path. This man looked to be in his 40s, with short hair and a blue polo shirt tucked into his jeans. His steps were quick, and his face carried a look of annoyance. He stopped in front of Mr. Henry and pointed toward him without hesitation. "Hey," the man said sharply, "you can't just sit here like this. This spot isn't for you." Mr. Henry looked up slowly. His expression remained calm, his eyes steady. He didn't answer right away. He simply studied the man for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to respond at all. "Excuse me," Mr. Henry said quietly, his voice soft but clear. The man folded his arms. "You heard me. This bench is always clean and quiet. People don't want to be bothered. Maybe find another place." Mr. Henry shifted slightly but stayed seated. He looked down at the ducks for a moment before replying. "I've been sitting here longer than most people have been visiting this park." The man scoffed and glanced around, clearly expecting support from someone nearby. But the people walking past didn't stop. A jogger slowed down, though, her eyes narrowing as she listened in. Just a few steps away, another figure entered the scene. A black woman in a green suit walked through the park entrance with calm confidence. Her shoes tapped lightly against the stone path. She held her head high, her eyes focused straight ahead. This was Mayor Maria Santiago, though few noticed her at first. She had purpose in her stride, heading in the direction of the oak tree, and the man seated beneath it. The man in the blue polo still stood with one hand on his hip, clearly not expecting what would come next. Mr. Henry, still seated and quiet, seemed to know more than he let on. The breeze picked up again, and a few leaves floated down from the branches above, as if the park itself was waiting for something to happen. The man in the blue polo was still standing in front of Mr. Henry, his finger pointed accusingly at him. He looked frustrated, like he was used to people listening to him without question. He didn't seem to notice the shift in the air as Mayor Maria Santiago walked closer, her green suit bright against the calm background of the park. Mr. Henry, however, remained calm. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat back a little, taking a deep breath. His cane rested gently beside him on the bench, and his hands folded quietly in his lap. It wasn't that he didn't care what was happening. It was just that he had lived long enough to know that sometimes silence was the best response to people like the man standing in front of him. The man in the blue polo spoke again, this time with more force. "You don't belong here, old man. I'm just asking you to leave. What's the big deal?" Mr. Henry slowly turned his head and looked up at the man. His eyes were steady, not angry, but full of experience and wisdom. He didn't rise to the challenge. Instead, he just spoke calmly. "This bench has been here long before you, and it will still be here long after we're gone." Just then, Mayor Santiago reached them. She wasn't in a hurry, walking with the sort of confidence that made heads turn without her needing to say a word. She had seen the scene from a distance, and as she approached, she could feel the tension in the air. The man in the blue polo looked at her, his face softening for a moment, but his arms stayed crossed. He didn't seem to know who she was, but the sudden change in the atmosphere made him hesitate. "Excuse me," the mayor said, her voice firm but not unkind. She addressed the man first, looking at him squarely. "Is there a problem here?" The man didn't answer immediately. He glanced between the mayor and Mr. Henry, suddenly unsure of how to respond. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His posture, which had been so defensive moments ago, now looked awkward and defensive, like he wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. Mr. Henry didn't look up at the mayor right away. He knew who she was, of course. Everyone in the park knew her. Mayor Santiago was well-loved, respected by both young and old. But he didn't need to be the first to speak. He waited for the man to say something, but all he could hear was the rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze passed by. After a brief pause, the mayor turned to Mr. Henry. She smiled, a small but warm gesture. "How are you today, Mr. Henry?" she asked, her voice softening as she acknowledged the elderly man with a friendly tone. Mr. Henry smiled back, his face lighting up. "I'm well, thank you. Just watching the ducks." The mayor nodded, still standing beside the bench, her eyes never leaving the man in the blue polo. The crowd in the park had started to notice the small gathering, some people even pausing to watch from a distance. The man seemed to be realizing that he was no longer in control of the situation. The man in the blue polo shifted uncomfortably, now fully aware of the crowd that had begun to gather around them. People had stopped what they were doing, turning their attention to the small scene unfolding under the oak tree. The light breeze rustled the leaves above, making the moment feel even quieter. The jogger who had paused earlier now stood nearby, watching closely. A few other people walking by slowed their pace, curious about what was happening. The man's face had turned slightly red as he looked at the mayor and then back at Mr. Henry. His earlier confidence seemed to be fading with each passing second. The weight of the situation was starting to hit him. He glanced down at his phone, maybe hoping for some kind of distraction, but the moment was too charged for him to ignore. He could feel the eyes of the parkours on him. Mayor Santiago stood tall and calm, her gaze steady. She wasn't in a rush. She knew how to handle these kinds of situations. It wasn't about being loud or aggressive. It was about standing firm and letting the truth speak for itself. She turned her attention to the man in the blue polo once again. "You don't need to speak to him like that," she said, her voice clear and firm. It wasn't an angry tone, but one that demanded respect. "Mr. Henry is a respected member of this community. He's done more for this city than most of us could even imagine." The man seemed to stutter for a moment. I didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice now sounding unsure. He looked around, but nobody came to his defense. The jogger who had been watching earlier now shook her head and muttered something to herself, as if disappointed. Mr. Henry, still calm and collected, looked at the mayor with a slight smile. He didn't need to say much. His presence, steady and dignified, was enough. He had seen all sorts of people over the years, and he knew when it was time to speak and when to let others take charge. The mayor nodded toward the bench. "Mr. Henry has been coming here for years. He's a man of quiet strength, someone who has always been here when the city needed him. Maybe it's time you learn a little about respect." The man in the blue polo shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced around at the growing group of people who were now watching him closely. The park, once filled with soft background noise, now felt like a space where every word and movement had weight. Finally, the man seemed to relent. His shoulders dropped slightly, and he looked at the ground for a moment, as though trying to find the right words to smooth over the situation. I didn't know," he mumbled, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry." The mayor nodded, her expression softening, though she didn't let him off easily. "You should always take the time to understand the people around you," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Every person has a story, and it's important to listen before you judge." The man nodded again, looking down at his feet, embarrassed. He didn't have anything else to say, and he slowly stepped back, retreating from the scene. The park seemed to breathe a little easier once he was gone. As the man walked away, The crowd around the bench began to disperse, some people continuing their walks, while others lingered, exchanging quiet words about what had just happened. Mr. Henry and Mayor Santiago remained seated under the oak tree, their peaceful moment returning to the park. It was as if nothing had happened at all, but in truth, something had shifted, respect had been restored, and the park felt a little more like home for everyone. As the man in the blue polo walked away, the park slowly returned to its peaceful atmosphere. The birds were once again chirping, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. A few people who had watched the scene quietly went back to their walks or jogs, but some lingered, still talking softly among themselves about what had just happened. Mayor Santiago remained standing beside Mr. Henry for a moment, looking out at the park around them. She had a slight smile on her face, not because of any victory, but because she knew the right thing had been done. The park felt safe again, the kind of place where everyone could feel welcome, no matter who they were. Mr. Henry took a slow, deep breath, his calm expression never leaving his face. He looked at the ducks again, who had returned to pecking at the breadcrumbs scattered on the ground. The simple act of watching them seemed to bring him peace. For him, it wasn't about the noise of the world. It was about finding moments of quiet joy. The mayor sat down on the bench beside him, her shoes tapping lightly on the stone path. She didn't speak right away. Sometimes, the best thing to do was to share a silence that didn't need words. After a few moments, she turned her head to Mr. Henry and spoke gently. "Thank you for handling that so well. Not many people can stay calm in a situation like that." Mr. Henry looked at her, his eyes twinkling. "There's no need to get upset over small things," he said softly. "People will come and go, but how we handle ourselves is what matters in the end." The mayor nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She had always admired Mr. Henry's quiet strength. He had seen so much in his years, far more than most people could imagine. But he never let it show in the way he treated others. He knew how to navigate the world with grace, a lesson that many people, especially those in power, could learn from. Just as they sat together, enjoying the stillness, a few more people approached the bench. They nodded politely to Mr. Henry, some even offering a friendly greeting. It was clear that he was well known here, not just because of his age, but because of the respect he had earned over the years. People recognized the value of his wisdom, even if they hadn't had the chance to speak with him personally. One of the parkgoers, a young woman with a stroller, stopped for a moment and smiled at the mayor. "I didn't realize who you were at first," she said with a laugh. "Thank you for what you did today. It's not always easy to stand up for what's right." Mayor Santiago smiled back. "It's always important to do the right thing, no matter how small the action may seem." As the conversation drifted to other topics, the park slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. Mr. Henry leaned back slightly on the bench, watching the world go by. The gentle hum of the park, the laughter of children, and the distant sound of water lapping at the pond's edge all mixed together in a perfect harmony. The moment was simple, but in that simplicity, it held the truth that respect for one another, no matter our differences, was what made the community strong. And in that moment, the park felt a little bit more like home. The peaceful air of the park settled back in as Mayor Santiago and Mr. Henry sat quietly together on the bench. A few people who had witnessed the earlier exchange now seemed to carry a bit more respect in their steps as they passed by. Their heads were slightly higher, as if they had been reminded of something important, that everyone, no matter their age or appearance, deserved to be treated with dignity. Mr. Henry, his back straight against the bench, didn't seem to mind the attention. He was used to being recognized in the park, though it wasn't the kind of attention that made him uncomfortable. It was more of a gentle acknowledgement of the life he had lived, the wisdom he had shared, and the kindness he had shown to those around him. As the mayor looked around the park, she saw people going about their day, some of them smiling, some of them lost in their own thoughts. There was an ease to the atmosphere now, as if the tension had melted away with the man in the blue polo. She knew the park was a place where people came to relax, to find peace, and to connect with their community. But today, it had also become a place of quiet reflection. The mayor shifted slightly and looked at Mr. Henry, her face thoughtful. "You know, sometimes people forget just how much the older generation has done for all of us," she said softly. "They're often overlooked, or treated like they don't matter anymore. But without people like you, this city wouldn't be what it is today." Mr. Henry gave a small smile, nodding in agreement. "It's not about being remembered," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's about doing what you can when it's needed. Even small things can make a difference." The mayor watched him closely, taking in his words. She had always admired his quiet wisdom, the way he had worked behind the scenes for so many years to improve the city. Most people didn't know the full extent of his contributions. They didn't know that he had been a mentor to so many, guiding younger generations without asking for anything in return. All he wanted was to see the world become a little better, one step at a time. As they sat there, a few more people walked by, nodding at Mr. Henry with a smile or a friendly greeting. The children who had been playing earlier continued to run around, their laughter filling the air. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden light across the park. A young man, maybe in his 20s, stopped as he passed by. He looked at Mr. Henry, then at the mayor, and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't know if you remember me, sir," he said politely, "but you helped my dad fix his car a few years ago. He always said you were a good man." Mr. Henry looked at him, his eyes softening as he nodded. "I remember," he said simply. "Your father was a good man too." The young man smiled, and after a moment, he moved on, continuing his walk. The simple exchange felt like a small reminder of the threads that connected everyone in the community. It wasn't about grand gestures or loud actions. It was about the quiet moments, the unspoken bonds that held everything together. Mayor Santiago leaned back slightly, her hands resting on her lap. She watched the park come alive with the warmth of the late afternoon sun. "It's moments like this that make me believe in the strength of a community," she said. "Even when things seem difficult, there's always kindness, always something good to hold on to." Mr. Henry nodded again, his gaze still on the ducks by the pond. "Kindness is always there. Sometimes you just have to look for it." The park was calm once more, the sounds of nature and life blending together. In that simple, quiet space, both the mayor and Mr. Henry felt a sense of peace, knowing that in their own ways, they had helped keep the community strong. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as the day started to wind down. The park had settled into a peaceful rhythm, with only a few people still lingering, enjoying the quiet evening. The sound of children's laughter had faded, replaced by the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft rustling of leaves. Mayor Santiago and Mr. Henry sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the last moments of daylight. The park, once again, felt like a place of peace and harmony. Even with the earlier tension, it had returned to its natural state, where people could sit, walk, and relax without worry. The man in the blue polo was long gone, and the moment felt distant, as though it had never happened. Mr. Henry shifted slightly on the bench, his cane resting against his leg. He glanced up at the sky, watching the clouds slowly change color as the sun dipped lower. The moment was simple, but it was everything he needed: a quiet space to breathe, to reflect, and to simply be. There was no rush, no pressure, just the calm of the park and the people around him. "It's a beautiful evening," Mayor Santiago said after a while, her voice soft and calm. She looked at the sky, admiring the colors that seemed to stretch on forever. Sometimes, it's easy to forget how much beauty there is in small moments like this. Mr. Henry nodded in agreement. Too often, people are too busy to notice. They're rushing from one thing to the next, forgetting to take a breath and just enjoy the world around them. "You're right," the mayor replied, her voice thoughtful. "Life moves so quickly, but these moments, the simple ones, are what matter the most. They're what we hold on to." They both sat there for a while longer, enjoying the quiet. The park felt different in the evening, with the sounds of the day gradually fading away. The air had a coolness to it now, and the soft light from the street lamps began to glow, adding to the calm atmosphere. A few people had stopped near the benches, chatting in low voices as they waited for the evening to settle in completely. The joggers who had been running earlier now walked slowly, cooling down after their exercise. Some families were packing up their picnic baskets, ready to head home, while others lingered, stretching the final moments of their day as far as they could. Mr. Henry looked over at the mayor, who was watching the people around them. She had a slight smile on her face, the kind that came with the understanding of how much good could be found in a community if people just took the time to notice it. "How do you do it?" he asked softly. "How do you keep the city moving forward with so many challenges every day?" Mayor Santiago paused for a moment, her smile fading slightly as she considered his question. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Some days are harder than others, and it can feel like there's no end to the problems. But then you see moments like today, when things come together, when people help each other, when kindness wins. That's what keeps me going. It reminds me why it's worth it." Mr. Henry smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe that's all any of us need, a reminder that the good is still out there." They sat in silence again, the sky now darkening as the stars began to appear. The park had shifted from a lively space to a calm, peaceful place for quiet reflection. And in that stillness, both the mayor and Mr. Henry found comfort. In a world full of noise, it was moments like this, simple, quiet, and full of meaning, that made everything feel right again. The night had fully settled in, and the park was now bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. The sky had turned a deep shade of blue, with only a few stars scattered above. The temperature had dropped slightly, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees, adding to the peaceful atmosphere. The park, which had been bustling earlier, was now much quieter. The joggers had finished their runs, the children were gone, and the families had packed up their picnic baskets. Only a few people remained, strolling leisurely along the paths or sitting on benches, taking in the calm of the evening. Mr. Henry and Mayor Santiago had been sitting together in silence for a while, content in each other's company. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with words. Sometimes it was enough to just be present. Both of them had lived long enough to know the importance of such quiet moments. A soft voice interrupted their peace, and both turned their heads to see a young woman walking toward them. She was holding a small basket and had a warm smile on her face. "Mr. Henry," she said, her voice kind, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Mr. Henry smiled warmly back at her. "Oh, I am, dear. The park is always good to me." The young woman smiled even more, nodding her head in agreement. "I just wanted to say thank you. You don't know this, but you've been such an inspiration to me. When I first moved to the city, I didn't know anyone, but you were the one who welcomed me, helped me find my way around, and showed me the good in this community." Mr. Henry looked at her with a gentle gaze. "I just did what needed to be done," he said humbly. "You know, we all need to look out for each other. That's how communities grow strong." The mayor, who had been quietly watching the interaction, spoke up. "Mr. Henry is right," she said with a smile. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest impact. It's people like him who remind us of that every day." The young woman nodded, her eyes bright. "I'll always remember that. Thank you, Mr. Henry. Thank you, Mayor Santiago, for all that you do." With that, she waved goodbye and continued on her way, leaving the two of them alone again. Mr. Henry watched her walk away, his face thoughtful. He wasn't one to seek recognition, but it always felt good to know that his efforts, no matter how small, had made a difference in someone's life. Sometimes the simple acts of kindness were the ones that lasted the longest. The mayor, noticing his thoughtful expression, spoke again. "It's easy to forget the impact we have on others, especially when we're just doing what feels right. But moments like these remind us that every little thing counts. Mr. Henry nodded. Yes, they do. It's the quiet moments, the everyday kindness, that shape a community. It's not the big speeches or grand gestures. It's the small, consistent actions. The two of them sat in silence for a few more minutes, enjoying the peace of the night. The soft light from the street lamps flickered gently, and the sounds of the night, the distant hum of traffic, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of the trees, created a calming symphony. Everything felt in balance, as if the park itself was breathing in rhythm with the world around it. As the mayor stood to leave, she turned to Mr. Henry with a smile. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice sincere. Mr. Henry nodded, tipping his hat slightly. "The pleasure's mine." And as she walked away, he turned his attention back to the peaceful park, feeling that deep sense of contentment. In a world full of noise and chaos, there was something deeply reassuring about the quiet moments, the kind that reminded him that all was right, if only for a little while. The night had fully settled in, and the park was nearly empty now, with only a few remaining walkers, mostly people who enjoyed the calm of the evening after a busy day. The last light of the sun had disappeared, leaving only the glow of the streetlights to guide the way. The cool breeze continued to move through the trees, and the peacefulness of the park seemed to wrap itself around the last few visitors like a warm blanket. Mr. Henry sat quietly on the bench, his cane resting beside him. He looked around, his eyes taking in the soft, familiar surroundings. The park had always been a place for him to think, reflect, and enjoy the simple moments in life. There was something about the stillness that brought him peace. The small sounds, like the rustling of the leaves, the distant chirp of a cricket, and the faint murmur of voices, all seemed to belong together, creating a perfect balance. He had been coming to this park for years, long before the mayor had arrived on the scene, and long before the city had changed in so many ways. Back then, it had been a quiet escape from the business of life, a place where he could sit and watch the world go by without feeling rushed or burdened by the way of time. But tonight, something felt different. The air was cooler, and the quiet of the park seemed to hold more meaning than it had before. Mr. Henry had seen a lot in his life, and many things had changed over the years. But he had also seen the good in people, the kindness that had always been there, even when it felt like the world was filled with noise and confusion. As he sat there, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. It was the mayor, walking toward him with the same calm confidence she always had. There was no hurry in her steps, no sign of stress or worry. She had the kind of presence that made people feel at ease, like everything would be all right, even if the world outside the park was uncertain. When she reached him, she sat down on the bench next to him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a few moments, they simply sat in silence, looking out at the park together. It was a peaceful silence, one that didn't need to be filled with words. Finally, the mayor spoke, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "You know, it's moments like this that make me think about the bigger picture," she said, looking out at the darkened park. "It's easy to get caught up in all the problems, to focus on what's wrong. But then you see something simple, like people walking through the park, or someone helping another, and you realize that the good is still there. It's still around." Mr. Henry smiled, his face reflecting the wisdom that came with age. "The good is always there," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's hidden, but it never disappears. You just have to keep looking for it." The mayor nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You're right. It's the small things that matter the most. The quiet moments, the acts of kindness, the things people do for each other without expecting anything in return." They sat together for a while longer, watching the night unfold around them. The park, once again, felt like a place of peace and unity. The world outside might have been filled with uncertainty, but in this small corner of the city, everything felt right. The simple moments of kindness, respect, and understanding were what held it all together. As the mayor stood up to leave, she turned to Mr. Henry, giving him a smile. "Thank you for always reminding me of that," she said. Mr. Henry tipped his hat with a smile. "It's the little things that keep the world turning." With that, the mayor walked off into the night, and Mr. Henry sat back on the bench, the quiet of the park wrapping around him once again. In a world that often felt uncertain, he knew that, at least for tonight, the world was exactly where it needed to be.